active. My talk is more about analytics and less about big data, quite honestly. So as we go along, feel free to ask questions, and let's make it more interactive. So introducing myself, I'm Padmanabh Davke, work for Narus. It's a Boeing company. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Boeing. So as we go through these, this is a simple agenda that I have. I'll give you a brief overview of our company, then talk a little bit about Narus technology, very high level overview, and then some key challenges and solutions, especially when it comes to marrying analytics with big data, essentially, right? So as I said, Narus, we've been around for about 12 years. We are a cybersecurity and R&D software company. We have a big CTO group that has relationships with a lot of different universities. We have, I don't think it says it here, but we have about 29 plus patents. And there are a lot of research publications that we have that talk about security and surveillance-oriented analytics. At the moment, what we are trying to do and how we are different from a plethora of other companies in cybersecurity is the fact that we are looking at the data end to end. We are one of the very few companies that actually own the data. So we have a layer that captures the network packets. We do deep packet inspection. We actually parse more than 100 protocols. And then we can really process very huge amounts of data on the network as it's come through. And through that, through our analytics, we are able to not only make sense of the network traffic at the physical level, but we can also look into the content, do some content analysis, and look at Facebook, Twitter type interaction. So we try to fuse all of that information together to give you a very good, cohesive picture of your entire network. So in some sense, the way we like to pitch it is we are going towards cyber 3.0, where you may have begun with just a lot of data in 1.0, this siloed cyber, to increasing velocity in your data, growth of applications and protocols, explosion of social networks, etc., on the cyber 2.0. And now we have cyber 3.0, where the same trend is continuing. You are going to add a lot of machine-to-machine communication to that, so that should give you far more useful information to do your analytics. And then we want to complement that with some of our machine learning techniques, the analytics technique, to derive useful insights through it. So if you look at what's happening right now, again, this growth pattern, more than 1.5 million applications in Android and Apple Store. The types of data are growing, clearly media, voice, so you need a lot of processing power to just understand what's going on. The different network types, there are clearly local, cloud-based computing is taken off. The line speeds have really increasing. In fact, I think I have another slide where we show at the moment, we are at the 20 gigabits per second kind of a processing capabilities. Some of the customers that we are getting, we want to go up to 600 gigabits per second line speeds, which are extremely difficult. Not only do the real-time analytics on, but storing these huge amounts of data is an increasingly a challenge for us. So, given the fact that we have all this big data, I was, I think, talking to someone earlier, everyone talks about big data, but I've seen very few things that are different in terms of what you can do with it, right? So, first of all, we do need the continuous visibility into it, and all those three dimensions that I talked about, the network dimension, the physical dimension, the user identities, and then the semantic dimension, the content, topics, sentiments, and so forth, right? And then when it comes to, depending on what you're trying to do, but usually it involves impact and root cause analysis. And we are looking for techniques where the manual processes in most of these cases, how can they be automated through analytics? Can we bring things attention to the analyst, the security analyst, without him necessarily having to dig through all this data and figuring all of that by himself, right? So that's insights that otherwise you would not get. And then more efficient spending, a faster resolution, dynamic approach to solve a dynamic problem. So clearly, for example, in security, a lot of people are moving from the signature-based approach, so to speak, to an approach which can prevent, in some cases, zero-day attacks, right? So you monitor the behaviors of your network, understand what's normal, and then you try to figure out where the anomalies occur, and based on that, alert the appropriate personnel. So don't wait for the signature, which is often defined manually after a few iterations, but try to detect the network anomalies and then stop the attacks right there. So that's the major difference. This is another view of what I was just talking about. So we have, complete insights into the network data. We can do deep packet inspection, and then you can create these 3 different views. These are for, in some sense, this is simplification. All this data is intertwined. But you can talk about the physical, the network plane data, the semantic data, the actual content, what are people talking about, and the user plane about their presence, where they are, geolocations, and so forth, right? And you can fuse these to create these insights. Probably a lot of detail here. I'm of course not going to go through that, but I think the main point of this slide is that at the very low level we have this layer called NCapture, which does the packet inspection. Right now support for 20 gigabits per second, 10G duplex line, and it'll eventually go up to 600 gigabits per second. So that's the network traffic. And then there is a layer in between, that's for the Hadoop lovers, right? So we ingest all this data, there is some real-time analytics happening, and then we store that data and later on use MapReduce to do some opportunistic correlations and so forth. That's our middle processing, and then the analytics is the higher level, which again operates data at rest as well as the real-time conclusions that you can draw from that data. So this is kind of a very simple diagram that illustrates this process. So we have what we call protocol vectors that we generate out of this traffic. And one of the main reasons for doing this is very often when you look at 20 gigabits per second, for example, it's not necessary to store every packet for you to do something useful out of it. We are able to compress it almost by 90% by figuring out what the relevant metadata should be. So that's the part where we create these what we call the protocol vectors. There is a thread that runs where almost near real time we can give you some statistics, some trends, either volumetric trends at the data level or the topical trends at the Twitter like, for example, on the content level, etc. We also run our what we call a policy engine on a real-time basis, where we create different kinds of baselines of the network behaviors. And as the data comes in, almost real-time, we'll be able to look at the current characteristics of the network along several dimensions and then compare that with the baseline and then throw alerts if we find something that doesn't quite fit the pattern, right? So we do those kinds of things on the real-time basis. And then there is a data at rest analytics, and a big part of data at rest analytics is training our models so that they can be used real time. So training the models, we have increasingly more amounts of data. When we train our models and do these correlations, then we use the standard Hadoop-based techniques to extract data out of it, feeding it to our learning process, and then we compute that model and we use that model on the real-time basis to classify, for example, malicious behaviors. That's one example. Or do sentiment analysis. That's another example in a very, very, very different domain. So that's kind of the simplified view there. Here are some examples. So when I mean machine learning for cybersecurity, like what does it really mean? And a lot of that is really geared towards this same idea that I had mentioned before. If there were things that were being done manually, which will take several days for you to process and then apply, we're trying to automate them. So a great example is the automated signature generation. So we have a technology, and actually we have a few papers on this, where you can monitor applications sessions, and then you can tokenize the sequence of commands that are being sent by application server to application client. And then we can learn and create a state machine on top of that, which says, hey, given these, starting from raw data, whether it's binary data or whether it's ASCII data, in terms of their communication protocol, we can almost reverse engineer that protocol and then classify these applications based on those communication patterns. And so someone has to label it at some day, but then we can conclude on that basis, without knowing the actual application, the name of the application, we can know how many different types of application there are over the networks, and then how much network bandwidth are they consuming, right? So in some sense, another way of putting it is that we are capturing those patterns and converting them into signatures. Then the analyst can label them and say, hey, this protocol is XYZ, and then it becomes part of the real-time processing, where if we see that pattern again, then real-time basis we can detect that, yeah, there is this application that is being in use by a person over your network, right? So once that happens, network administrators can enforce policies in terms of, hey, you're not allowed to play Farmville on your network, right? When you are in the office, for example. So those are the kind of applications that we do. A similar thing happens on the anomaly detection. So I'm not going to go into too many details, happy to discuss later on. But I wanted to give you a flavor of the kind of things that we do using the analytics and machine learning portion of it. So this slide kind of summarizes the challenges, and some of these I've been kind of mentioning prior. So increasing network traffic, line speeds from 20 gigabits, we're shooting for 600 gigabits per second. And that translates to about 210 terabytes to 6 petabytes of data per day. So some of our customers require us to keep that data for a few months. And so it's both a cost and technology. They're both challenge. How do you do it very efficiently? How do you do it very cheaply? Right? That's a problem for us. Diversity of deployment. So we have a customer base, and increasingly in future we are trying to go from very high cost transaction kind of a business model to many more lower price transaction models, and so then it becomes a challenge. So you have to design a system that could scale from a Hadoop cluster that has one node with Hadoop cluster that has hundreds of nodes. So that's a challenge. Operational issues. So because we operate on the network, very often our data centers would be in one place, but the probes would be all over, and so managing the communication between the network probes and our data center becomes a challenge, because the internet is intermittent, it's bursty, and so forth. So we have to account for all of that in our system design. And then the one big question around Hadoop is when we store all this data, as compared to database systems, there is not adequate security, and I don't feel like I have a good solution to it. So some of the lessons learned or some of the solutions that we have found. So given the huge amounts of data, the fact that we can't store all of it and we don't need to, we do extract metadata, or those vectors that I had mentioned on the other slide. And then we get so if you start with 20 gigabits, after we process and extract metadata into it, we only have to store 2 gigabits per second, not 20 gigabits per second. So that's actually very, very useful in managing your storage costs and technology and processing costs. Domain knowledge for message compression. So you can use generic algorithms for message compression, but because you know the data model, you can do certain things that you otherwise will not be able to do to compress the data even further. And these are some of the really commonly used techniques, using shortcodes for enumerated values, or because you know the relationship between different network vectors, eliminating the redundancies and duplications when you store the data and so forth. So we do that to minimize our storage. Then this is one of the lessons learned where there are certain efficiencies that one can achieve if you, let's say you're using Hadoop, you can use Hadoop with HDFS, you can use Hadoop with HBase. There are a lot of different alternatives, Hive, Take, a lot of different animals. But what we have found is that compared, at least between comparison between HDFS and Hadoop HBase, in terms of people that I have in my team, in terms of being able to do the data modeling and queries and all those abstractions, I found that it's much better to work with HBase, which gives you almost not totally relational, but a good ability to do schemas and queries and so forth. So that's much better. If you use it correctly, then the performance difference is not as much. And then we are also looking into some, we haven't quite exploited this yet, but there are network, people are putting certain specialized processing on the chips. So if you look at deep packet inspection, for example, there are network cards that you can get so that you don't have to use your x86 machine to do that processing. It will do it right at that level, and that's far more efficient. So we're using some of those things, haven't explored it completely, but definitely a direction that we are going to go. So one of the things I wanted to definitely mention is that with this whole big data thing, no one wants to pay attention to relational databases, but we are using it all over the place. In fact, a lot of things that we do on the anomaly detection is based on the relational algebra, right? So we compute a lot of metrics, counters and all that, and it's very easily expressible in a relational language. It doesn't have to be SQL, but it happens to be very handy. And then so we do that both for in-memory, but we also do it outside where, one way of thinking about it is that you have all this data and then you have analytics and so forth. But the results of those analytics is ultimately at the end of the day, there are different types of entities and relationships. And some of those relationships are given to you because of the way data flows into you. Some of them you derive using the machine learning. So ultimately a relational model is very, very simple to understand for the analysts. And so it comes in very handy to use that. And in fact, you look at the industry, if you look at a lot of different solutions that are kind of emerging, there is HP Vertica, there is the whole HANA thing that keeps a trade-off between keeping things in memory versus Hadoop and HBase. IBM is coming up with DB2Glue. So a lot of companies are now realizing that these worlds are collapsing, right? Not everything is MapReduce. They're starting to kind of realize that, right? So we are kind of looking at that too, and there are these preliminary experiments that we have done. We actually just concluded that. I don't have the final results yet, where if I want this relational view of the world for my analytics, I can do MapReduce, I know that. But can I explore techniques where the queries don't get translated into MapReduce? So Impala, for example, has its own parallel query processing engine. So we've been experimenting with that, and the initial results are that compared to, for example, a MySQL cluster that was one of the candidates, at the lower end of the spectrum, if you have roughly about 10 million rows, 12 million, 10 to 50, it works great. And then as you increase the size of that, provided that there are no joins, the improvement that you get from some of these other techniques that give you SQL or Hadoop, but not by mapping MapReduce, are actually pretty significant, right? Some business considerations. So it's again, it's not always about technology. Given the fact that we sell internationally, for example, we do need global support. Total cost of ownership, which not only system acquisition. So one could argue that hey, go with Hadoop and you'll have about $1,000 per terabyte. But in the end, it's not just the system acquisition cost, but it's also the people that have the right kind of capabilities that I have to pay. How many analysts do I have? How many people need to work on that data? How is that coordination being done? So there are a lot of factors for us commercially that we have to take into account. And so this is one of the reports that we have. I have given the name of the report down there. So they did this, the cost analysis on two types of systems. So the one type of system is where, this is our style of system. So we really don't have an army of analysts that are working on this data. We define our own analytics and present it so that the analyst can drill down into it after in terms of exploration. But all the machine learning and everything that we do is actually owned by us, right? So from the analyst perspective, it's just like any other business intelligence application. And there are not many of them. There are few analysts that actually work on this data. So that is one characteristic. The second characteristic is that the data, even though it's high volume, it's not transactional. So it's not like we are a retail organization where millions of transactions are flowing through the system and then database has to preserve the integrity of it. So that is the one end of the spectrum. That's what we have. And then the other end of the spectrum is, especially if you go to either the financial sector, you go to banks, or you go to retail. Typically, they need a kind of a marriage of between OLTP and OLAP, right? And that's where traditionally the data warehousing solutions have been deployed. And if you look at that model, then they do have transaction processing. They do have a lot of different departments that are operating on the same data. They do need to encode those relationships right when they store it, unlike us, where we store these vectors and it's totally up to us. So if you compare those two scenarios, then in our kind of system, especially in terms of the cost, the total system cost, the Hadoop-based model actually comes out a lot ahead. Whereas if you are a bank or if you are a financial entity, then or if you're in the retail industry, then it might be better in a lot of instances to actually go with the traditional data warehousing solution. So that's really about it. So in summary, what distinguishes us is that we own the system end to end. We blend network semantic and user-oriented views to create a really unique insights. We can apply it to data loss prevention, threat detection, a lot of different things. Both real-time and at-rest analysis. Mainly, the real-time is stateless, so you get a packet, you get a vector, and then based on prior learning, you can classify it, you can cluster it, you can generate alerts, all of those things. And at-rest analysis for training model, sometimes opportunistic correlations, for example, different fragments of a user identity, for example, and detecting mega trends, right? So what happens on a day-by-day basis, for example. And then in terms of the approach, we do have Hadoop and HBase for horizontal scaling and cost-effective storage. But then we do employ relational databases both in memory and out of memory to actually create a simplified view and store it and scoop the data out as on a per needed basis for the analyst to look at. So with that, that's actually it. These are just some pictures marketing put up there, but all right. So any questions?
So if there is you have data which is stored movies, and if there is some kind of major failure or there is no body failure, where you lose all the data, right? What is your recovery strategies, and if how do you prevent it, or is there a feature in the data itself or Hadoop itself, how do you do it?
Please repeat the question.
Sure. So what he's asking for is that in case there are failures in some or all parts of the system, then what are the strategies to prevent those from happening, or if they do happen, then how do you take care of preventing data loss? How do you recover? So that you have to look at it from the streaming standpoint and the storage standpoint, right? So from the storage standpoint, we really use the typical tech. Hadoop, if you go to, then it's going to make 3 copies of your data and so forth, right? But at the flow level, we do use store and forward techniques, and if needed, based on the SLA, we can actually store some of those queues to, for example, a flash drive. And so if the systems go down at different points in our pipeline, then even there are, again, depending on SLA, there are periods for which we can sustain a component going down, right? So there are redundancies built into the system, both at the queue level and the processor level, at different points. And increasingly, in fact, if you look at the commercial offerings, a lot of things these days, even on the streaming level, you can get out of the box. So you can get something like Storm, but if you look at some other products, then they have built-in store and forward mechanism. They have built-in redundancy mechanism where if the operator in your stream goes down, then they'll actually have a standby available that can take over that operator, for example. So it's a little different than the at-rest kind of a piece. But the techniques are there for you to kind of take care of, make your system highly available.
Great presentation. One question was, since you have been in existence for about 12 years, right?
Yeah.
I don't think the problem has changed, the kind of network traffic you're getting.
Yeah.
Before Hadoop, what were you using?
We actually tried, using the data warehousing before, and it almost worked, but the cost, even if we could have, we may have been able to get it to work, but the costs were prohibitive. I mean, we could never have sold it as a commercially viable product. But yeah, so in that sense, Hadoop was a good answer to from that perspective.
So
Yeah.
what is the cluster size? It's like the 20 gig, and how do you kind of foresee when it really hits that 600 gig you're talking about?
Yeah, so right now, I mean, for 20 gigs gets reduced down to 2 gigs, and the cluster size is probably around 15 nodes or so, But at 600 gigabytes is probably going to be 100 or a few hundred, depending on how much data we want to store. So it's a function of not just the data rate, but also how long you want to store it, and how much of it you want to store. So those are the rough figures. Yeah.
So you said that you should use relational database in memory. What is that? Are you using Gold?
We're actually using H2. Yes. Yeah, that may change, but but we wanted something very fast, open source to begin with, and then we might replace that with a commercial offering. But it's amazing the difference in performance when you have something in memory versus when you go outside.
Have you tried to interface with Mongo and Cassandra and all those kind of things?
Yeah, so we're thinking about that because part of the evolving portfolio that we have actually does involve, especially when you start with an incident, a security incident, for example, and in the course of figuring out exactly what happened, you have to jump from an entity to entity. So it's, conceptually it's actually an object graph, and your nodes in that graph are your either people, machines, so forth. So we are exploring that, but we haven't put anything in production yet. But that's a great usage of, for example, Neo4j or something like that, where you can hopefully better, more efficient at traversing these relationships so that you can quickly show them as the analysis jumping from point A to point B. But haven't done anything significantly yet.
One more question. So, is the technology similar to what is in complex event processing? Is it exactly what it's talking about? Or,
Yeah, it's hard to. Parts of it are like complex event processing. But they are, how do I put it? Instead of taking a complex event processing engine and applying it to our domain, we are just saying, these are the requirements of my domain, and we have built technology to address exactly that problem.
One last question. We can always have more discussion during the dinner.
What is the kind of monitoring infrastructure you put in place, or what tools you're using to monitor your infrastructure, and what are your advantages of the tools that you're using?
Yeah, I think we've examined a lot of systems. We've gone to look at some startup products for monitoring and management. We have looked at IBM. We have looked at HP. Cloudera distribution, Big Insights distribution from IBM for the IBM Streams product for real-time processing. We haven't quite, initial systems that we have put into production actually use our own monitoring infrastructure, but we're in the process of going to one of the commercial distributions, but we haven't, decided yet. So I don't want to comment that right now.
So how do you monitor your environment?
So we have our own technology for monitoring. The standard techniques for making sure your components stay upright, along with some the hot standbys and redundancies in your system and so forth. So there's no single answer to your question. Yeah. Yeah, I think you had a.
We'll ask the question.
Okay. All right. All right. Well, thank you.